All right, Dr. Jennifer Dragonette, welcome back. How are you?
Hi, Paul. I'm doing well today. How are you?
I'm doing great. So, we hit, I must have been a great episode. I have to look at my notes. Episode 178, because we were talking about support and control and the fine line between those two. And we've got a lot of listener responses. And I think that's the thread that we're going to pull on today. I know that I had a few people reach out to me. I know you had a few people reach out to you. And in particular, I'm going to pull this up so I can get at, I think, what we want to start talking about today. And to set this up, the message that I've got back from one of our listeners was this struggle between, we'll call him Stan. Stan had sent me this message about how he was having a conversation with his spouse and they were going through a medical issue. And I think what really resonated with him was this but versus and. And he even made the comment that, like, I've long had this practice that if you say yes and follow it up with a but, it negates the yes. And it's like it never really dawned on me going through this situation that we are with our family how powerful that was or powerful that is. And, talking through this, like, he's a very optimistic person, Stan is, and he really wants to help and be supportive. But I think the thing that he said that resonated with him is like, I never really stepped back to see it from the other person's point of view and their perspective. And that was like my biggest takeaway. And the cool thing about Stan's text is that he's like, I really love listening to these conversations with Dr. Jen. And that really hit home for me and resonated. So that's where I kind of wanted to start today with Stan's text and then go from there. This idea of having these two competing thoughts in your head where you want to be positive and supportive, but yet you also need to let that other person's feelings sink in. So
Yes.
where would you like to take that setup?
Well, first of all, I'm grateful to Stan for sending in his thoughts and this question. And I really love when you and I get to interact with people who listen because it helps us know what's important. And these things that I talk about all the time, some of them are just such subtle shifts. And this is one of them, that subtle shift from a yes but to a yes and, or a either or to a both and. It's one of the things that I try so hard to monitor in my own language. And so for the duration of the podcast today, I'm going to challenge myself to really mean but if I say but, or really mean and if I say and. It's challenging just to
It is.
even get that 1 or 2 seconds ahead of our speech enough to think, is this what I mean to say? And it's a good challenge to take on because it matters. And when we can be deliberate about what we're actually meaning, what we're actually saying to these people we love or our clients or our friends, our words matter. And so I think that example from Stan is a really good one. Things happen in our life that are very painful sometimes. Our partner has an illness or is working through a hardship, or like we've talked about in other episodes, there's a layoff or something really, really challenging. And they have their own experience. We have our own experience. The idea that we have to choose, are you in pain or are we hopeful? It's too binary, right? And so when we can start to incorporate all of it, we can say, wow, this is really scary. This is hard. I imagine this is really painful for you. And I have hope. And I'm worried, right? All of these things are actually true because we aren't people with just one emotion at a time. We aren't people with even one desire or need at a time. And when we're talking with folks who we think need our help or support, which is really where a lot of this topic came from, was, that episode where we talked about make suring and trying to kind of get in and manage someone else's feelings or emotions for them. We often do get into this either or mentality, right? Are you in pain or are we hopeful? And it can force people to kind of advocate for their pain or advocate for the importance of us understanding their point of view. And it's tricky that way because we want to include all of those things. So if I say, I know you've got this illness, but we're going to make it through it, we have such good intentions there, right? Of course, we hope that our loved one is going to come through this illness or that they're going to feel better or maintain their hope. And if we've got that but in there, We're basically saying to that person exactly what Stan said in his email or text, that we've negated the first half of that. And so we're putting that person in a position where they now have to say, I don't think you get how much this is hurting, or I don't think you understand how hopeless I do feel. And then we're in this dynamic where that person has to prove to us how much it hurts or how worried they really are. They're not actually able to hear our support, and it starts to feel really invalidating.
Yeah, and just listening to you say that, I can just, being through this with Teresa, I could just feel the argument just building and resonating, ready to erupt like a volcano.
Yes, yes. And so often, and I'll just take the example of couples because I do work with a lot of couples in my practice. So often that is where these arguments originate, is this real misunderstanding of what our intention is because we didn't phrase it the way we really mean it. Right? So
Yeah,
often I'll hear couples say something like that. Well, you didn't understand how much this hurt. And it's, part of the painful stories we tell ourselves because we had to take that stance in favor of the struggle, in favor of the pain.
it makes me think about couples in general, and obviously I have my own biases with my my relationship with Teresa, my wife, and I know I've probably told her this before, and I know that I probably have told other families I work with that are part of the TAMMA family this before, is that more than likely you collectively as a couple are probably on the same page more often than you think. It's just when we have these, for lack of a better term, blow ups, let's just use real language, arguments, fights, whatever, they they're about something smaller, I guess. I'm probably not phrasing this right. Couples have probably more in common than they think. And I think by trying to focus on that, because I don't know of any couple that wants to sabotage their relationship, but getting back to the point that I think you're making in this conversation, where it's going is that sometimes just by choosing the wrong word or two can set us down a path that was like, well, wait a minute, hold on, what the heck just happened? Because I thought we were on the same page with this, whether it's financial, raising kids, what movie we're going to, whatever it may be, and then like seconds later, it's like, okay, we're in this standoff.
Yes, yes. And to detour for just a second into couples dynamics, and then we'll come back to the and topic. Couples have this very small window when we're starting to get into some friction, which is going to happen, right? Even the happiest couples are going to have some moments of friction, and it's expected. And this is something I try to tell couples or people in relationships, because it feels horrible when we're arguing or having friction or having a blow up with someone who we deeply love. Often this is the person we love most in the entire world. And there's friction happening, and it's really scary for both people. And so as we're heading into that friction, we have a very small window of time where we can say, oh my goodness, that's not what I meant. Let me take that back. What I meant was and, or, I think maybe I said something that I didn't mean. But when I say we have a small window, it's because our body's getting involved. So you and I, Paul, are sitting here talking to each other calmly. We are in probably very much a sympathetic nervous system state where we're relaxed and we're able to think and plan out what we're about to say and check in with each other's faces. And yes, you're getting me. If I started to get nervous or worried or scared, which is easy to happen in a relationship because biologically we are just tuned to our partners. We don't want to lose this connection. And so any threat to that is going to fire up our nervous system and move us more into a fight or flight state. And so in couples therapy, we often refer to that as being flooded. And once we are flooded, we can't continue that conversation. I really strongly recommend to couples to actually take a physical break, at least 20 minutes apart from each other, to just let your nervous system come back online in a place where you can actually hear each other. Because one of the things that happens when we are flooded is we quite literally stop being able to hear accurately. So, coming back to the idea of the and versus the but, something that subtle, I love you, but I'm really angry that you did this thing, that might be enough to kick that nervous system into overdrive. Wait a minute, you don't love me? Right? That's what we hear when I love you, but, or I'm proud of you for doing this, but our nervous system is going to kind of rise up to defend us, because that's what it's there for. It's there to protect us against a threat, even if the perceived threat is this tiny little word from this person who loves us. So it's a really powerful approach to say, I want to talk to this person I love deliberately, with intention. Not that every single interaction has to be a sit down therapy session with your partner. In those moments where we can really connect with someone and see all these different sides of them, all these parts of them, help them see that we too feel multiple different ways, we're connecting in a way that our nervous system can relax into, and we can hear so much more accurately.
So when I'm thinking of this, is there a way to like do like a pregame prep? Like if you know that you're going to be having a bigger conversation with a spouse, one of your kids, coworker, boss, you name it, is there a way for us to get inside of ourselves and kind of mentally do some prep work before we have that conversation? Is that I'm assuming, I would think that's helpful, number one, but number two, is there a good way to think about how to get in that right frame of mind to be able to make sure that you're using and not but?
Yes, and I love that question. I'm thinking
And
of
for
a
those
couple different
listening,
ways.
you should have seen the big smile on Dr. Jen's face when she said that.
It's
That was
really true.
priceless.
Well, and Paul, you asked such good questions, right? I mean, this is really it's a great way to think about it, because we do want to prepare for these conversations. If we are going into a conversation with our boss or our business partner or a client that's really important, we're going to plan for that conversation. We're going to prepare ourselves. We might even set some rules of engagement or have an agenda, because it's important, because we take it very seriously. And here we are having these, one-off conversations in the kitchen over coffee with someone that are equally important, and yet we just kind of fly into it, or we say things that we don't mean and hope we can just make it up later, and often we can. So there are a few different ways that we can really prepare. One, I'm going to kind of talk about ways we can prepare as an individual within ourselves, and then some ways that we can actually prepare as a partnership for that.
Okay.
So as an individual, I really like to utilize a set of interpersonal effectiveness skills. And we've talked about a few different types of therapy that I practice and that I teach other clinicians. These skills come from a type of therapy called dialectical behavior therapy. And it's a really great therapy to bring into this conversation
That
because
sounds scary.
it,
Di- Diabolical?
diabolical, yes, some of the therapists I've trained refer to it diabolical therapy. Dialectical means two things that seem opposite that can be true at the same time. So it's a both and. That is exactly what dialectical
Yeah.
means, is both of these things. And so DBT has a list of interpersonal effectiveness skills, and we can talk about each of them in subsequent shows if we like. The one that I like to use most often is a process called Dear Man. And briefly, it's an acronym, and DEAR stands for describe, express, assert, and reinforce. And that's really the meat of that skill. So in one sentence or less, and that's the key, we don't want to be going on for paragraphs and paragraphs like I'm doing right now. In one sentence or less, describe what's going on that you're reacting to, express how you feel about it, a real emotion, assert what you want, and reinforce why it's in both of our best interests to do that thing. So I frame that as a kind of a pregame thought process. You can even write that down. So let's say there's something coming up with our partner that we want to talk about, or even the example from Stan that he texted you about. So he might say, "Hey, spouse, I realize that you've been going through this illness, and I've been trying to be encouraging, and I feel sad about that because I'm now realizing that I might have been invalidating how you're feeling. I would like to have an opportunity to talk with you about how I'm really feeling so that we can connect on a deeper level and you can feel more comfortable sharing with me what's going on." Right? So that's DEAR. We can do it in very benign situations. "Hey, I just got my credit card bill. It's $5 too high. I'm frustrated about that. I'd like to talk with someone who can take that charge off my bill so I can remain a loyal customer." Describe, express, assert, reinforce. So when I use that format, it helps me organize my thoughts. What is it that I'm actually reacting to? What is the emotion I'm actually feeling? That's super important for us to be able to say to people we care about, because it feels much less defense. It brings up fewer defenses if I say to someone, "I'm really scared," or "I'm really disappointed." versus just blasting them, or I'm furious at you, or we're not meshing on this. So that emotion is really important. So that's a way that I like to kind of prepare myself for those conversations, is just getting my head on straight on what is it that I'm even talking about.
And I would, if I can interject with another question, like with what you just described, I don't know how natural that feels or seems. So is that something that like it takes a lot of practice, like a learned behavior, like over time? Because maybe for some people that could come natural, but I'm just thinking myself personally and people I know, I'm like, I don't know, that one's kind of tricky.
It takes practice. It's worth it. And so I do recommend that people practice it. The second half of the man part, I'll just say, is for, let's say you do that describe, express, assert, reinforce, and that person still says no. Then the man is a reminder to stay mindful. So just keep talking about it, appear confident, and negotiate if possible. That DEAR, DEAR, I do recommend that people practice it, particularly in these benign situations where it's kind of like I just need to ask someone for something that I think they might be willing to give
Right.
me.
It's not like a pressure cooker moment.
Exactly. We can use it in those moments. And if we've practiced it ahead of time, it will come more naturally. I use this skill every day, multiple times a day, because I use it so often that it does kind of roll off the tongue. It wasn't always that way. So practicing it is a really good idea. And I like this one because you can actually write it out. So what I often recommend to my clients is write it out and use this during a phone call where you can actually read your script. Hey, Paul, I'm going to just make up an example here. Hey, Paul, I just got your invitation to do a podcast next week. I'm so disappointed I can't actually make that time. I'd love to reschedule with you so that it's a time that works for both of us. That's that format, DEAR. So we can practice it enough that it starts flowing. And it's okay if it's a little clunky, because what's cool is if people know that we're working on improving our communication, they will often give us a lot of grace. So if I'm working with couples, I'm going to have them practice this skill in vivo and then encourage each other to really give a lot of praise and grace if we're trying to do something different with our communication.
So when you're working with couples, like, and they're in your office together, like you're having them practice like right there on the spot.
Yes, yes. I'll have them practice this skill or some other skills that I'll mention here, partly because, and this comes back to your question of, how do we do this pregame or kind of get ourselves in a position to have harder conversations? When couples practice things like this, or I'll give you a few other sentence starters in a second, it also becomes a cue to pay attention. So one of the types of things that I like to practice in couples therapy, we'll do a Dear Man together and practice that. The other thing I like to do is a process that I've kind of called the story. So in my mind, it's kind of a 3-step process. I know I'm throwing a lot of processes out here today, so we can kind of take it slowly.
No, this is good.
The story process is step 1. I share with you the story I realize I'm telling myself about what's happening in your head. So, Paul, the story I'm telling myself is that you're angry with me because I came home late last night. So that's step 1. Is that accurate? Step 2 is my partner saying, yes, that is accurate. Or no, actually, it's not. I'm not angry. I'm worried about work or something, which usually we're off a little bit. When we recognize we're telling ourselves a story about what someone else is thinking or feeling, we hear the kind of mixturing echoes in there, right?
Yep.
And then step 3, which is the hardest part, is believe what that person is telling you about their own story. Right, so Paul's story I'm telling myself is that you're upset with me. Is that accurate? No, Jen, I'm not upset with you at all. I'm just worried about something else. Okay, even though I thought you were upset, I'm now going to take your accurate feedback about what you're thinking and feeling and incorporate that into my understanding of you. It's hard because we can be convinced, no, I can tell you're mad. No, I know you're upset with me, right? And it doesn't feel very good to be told how we feel. So the way that I like to think of that as kind of a pregame or a setting the stage is if someone says to me, hey, Jen, the story I'm telling myself is, I'm going to sit up real straight and pay attention because they're about to share with me something that is really important. So we practice that in couples therapy a lot. Or sometimes I'll encourage couples to say, I'd like to have a dialogue with you. Is now a good time? So all of these ways, it's what we think of as a softened startup to harder conversations. We're much more able to stay in that sympathetic nervous system state where we can really accurately hear and process. If I have a slow startup, if someone says to me, hey, is now a good time to talk? Or I'd like to share with you a story that I'm telling myself versus, I can't believe you're so upset with me. Or what's that look about? Why are you looking at me like that? That's going to be a much harsher startup, and it's going to jar my nervous system, and I'm not going to be able to have that conversation very well.
So I just, for the audience, like you could tell, like I'm like jotting notes feverishly on this because it's just, it's a lot to take in. And I think, one of the things I feel like we're talking about some of the same topics, month after month, but like with a different twist to it. And before we decided like what we're going to talk about today, like I often wonder, how often do people need to hear these types of conversations and these different tools that you're proposing, like the Dear Man, before they really sink in? Because to me, I think about Marty Zweig, who's a columnist at the Wall Street Journal, prolific writer. He's been there for I don't know how many decades. And he writes a weekly column. And he said, one of the toughest things about what he does and what he writes about, because he writes about personal finance, is basically saying the same thing over and over 52 times a year, but with a different twist so that people think, oh, well, that's interesting and that's new. And it's not. He's basically saying the same thing, repeating himself, but he's able to put a different, not spin on it, but use words differently to basically get across the same point, like over and over and over again. I think, just thinking back to my experience with my therapist, it's probably very similar. I feel like we've probably been talking about the same thing over and over for the last 7 years or 8 years, and it's just now finally getting to a point where it's like it's all coming together. Like it's like, oh yeah, but it just took a long time to get there.
Yes, it's true. And I do the same thing with myself. I talk about this kind of stuff all day, every day. I teach it. And even so, every week or two, I have some new realization or some new way of incorporating this information. And we do need to think about it and hear about it a lot because we are just biologically wired to look for the threat. I often think about it this way, that people are probably tired of hearing me talk about the nervous system. It's just, it's part of how we operate.
Right.
Our nervous system does a really good job keeping us alive, right? It's there to pick up the threat and keep us alive. It is not really there to make us happy or connected. And so we are constantly having to work with that reality. And it's not even so much about, overcome it. We need our nervous system be exactly the way it is. It's just that it might not steer us in a direction of joy and contentment. It's just keeping us safe. And so sometimes these ideas of, how do we connect or how do we work with that, or even something as simple as shifting to an and to incorporate all of the realities of life, we're going to have to hear that over and over again because it's just not our innate nature to do it. And sometimes we just have a situation in life that it doesn't make sense to us until we try something out. So a lot of what we need to do with our relationships, and if we want to shift or change aspects of our psychology, is evidence. We have lots of evidence that we are safe because we avoid these hard things, or we are safe because we don't take risks in this way. And we have to build up evidence to the contrary, that I can also have a hard conversation with someone I love and still be safe. Or I can also take this risk because it's really important to me and I made it through and I actually grew or improved. We have to consciously build up this evidence for ourselves. And so we may need to hear about it or talk about it many different times and in many different ways. And I'm happy to do that because we just get these different levels of insights every time we think about a topic from a kind of a witness observer perspective.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So I don't know if you finished that thought on, I think you had laid out that you were talking about how to do the Dear Man from an individual perspective, and then were you going to pivot to another perspective as well?
Yeah, so the piece that I was saying
cut you
about
off on that point, sorry.
No, actually, I think I said what I wanted to there about just with couples then. The way to do that pregame is to have some sort of a way to say, I'd like to talk to you about something. important. One thing that I recommend for a lot of couples, and I mean, to your point, I can't remember if I've said this on a previous episode, so apologies if I did. I like to recommend just a designated check-in time. I often think of it as a walk and talk, just something where once a week you've got 15 minutes even.
That is so powerful. I know we've talked about this before, and sometimes I know I've talked to Teresa about this. I know I've talked to other families about it. I was actually just having a conversation with a prospective family yesterday, and she's like, I'm having my weekly meeting with my husband tomorrow, and we'll talk about this, and then we'll get back to you on questions that we have. And I think it's something that we try to do. Like, we try to have every Sunday night we try to have our team meeting where we go through. Now it's even more important because of all the schedules that we have with our 4 kids, and going through schedules and what they have for school. But where I feel like Teresa and I fall short is we do that collectively as the 6 of us as a family, but Teresa and I aren't doing that as a couple, as the 2 of us.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. A lot of couples, myself included, are a little resistant to it. It sounds hard, or it sounds like it's going to take a lot of time or a lot of energy. And when we carve out that space, and it allows us to have these conversations in a way that isn't so heated. So I'm thinking of a couple who I work with in my private practice who really have done a beautiful job of incorporating a walk and talk once a week, whether they need it or not. It's kind of like, let's just go for a walk if there's anything bubbling up. And that's really the way to think about it is, can we catch this conflict, this friction, this disagreement, this assumption when it's small? When it's kind of a frustration rather than a rage, or a disappointment rather than, deep sadness. Because we are entitled to feel differently about things. We are going to feel differently about things. Couples are going to have the same argument over and over again because of just our history and how we're wired. And if we can see that coming a little bit farther down the road, or if we can say, oh, you know what, this thing kind of rubbed me the wrong way, or this is coming up and let's talk about what we agreed to do about this so that we don't run into that same problem. What I find over and over again is those couples don't need to rise to the level of a full-fledged argument a lot of the time because they're able to talk about it. And there actually is something powerful about doing it while walking, because we're moving our bodies in a way that's relaxing. We're able to have it be a little bit more casual. We're not staring across the table at each other, having to maintain eye contact in this difficult conversation. So I really do recommend something like that as a way of just kind of a state of the union. How are we doing this week? What are we feeling weird about? I also like to recommend, particularly if those are challenging, to start with a very brief appreciation for each other, which again may feel a little forced at first, or a little bit robotic. That's totally fine. We can laugh about it. I always say you can blame me. You can say Dr. Jen's making us do this weird thing. We're trying it anyway. I'll take it. I'm happy to hold that. And that can be a nice way too to just release a little bit of that pressure. Okay, we're going to be talking about hard things, and I so appreciated the way you showed up for me this week. I just really noticed that you've been trying to work on this thing that we talked about, right? That gives us that reminder that we are safe with this person.
Well, that just reminded me, because I sent Teresa a text this morning because I knew she was going to probably have a challenging work day, and I just sent her a quick text, and she's like, yeah, that was probably the best thing you could have done for me all day today. So
yes,
hopefully I'm already following your advice.
Those little things matter so much. It really isn't always about the boombox on the front lawn kind of grand gesture moment in relationships. Sometimes it is those, just, I'm remembering that it's going to be a hard day for you and I'm thinking about you. Or, I mean, if you want to really connect with your partner, tell them you're proud of them for something, right? Of course we are. It's the way we want to talk with our kids. We need to hear that. We need to be reminded of those things. We can just get into these cycles where we're only pointing out the things that don't work. And hearing from our partner that they're proud of us for something specific is really deeply connecting and powerful.
I think, actually, I need to jot that down because I think that's a great topic for another conversation, is how, because I really struggle with that with my kids. And it kind of goes back to this point, this conversation of but versus and. Mm-hmm. Is that they do something great and then they follow it up with something that's not great, and I'm like, you did a great job with this, but then you did this. Mm-hmm. And that's That's a really big internal struggle that I have.
Yeah, it's a really good one to watch for. We do it to ourselves too. You know, a lot of the ways that we talk to our loved ones really mirror the internal dialogue that we have with ourselves. And one of the reasons that I like this reminder to focus on the and is because so many of us can disqualify things that are really positive. You get a 98% on a test, or your kid does, and it's like, oh, great job, but what about those 2%? And I mean that, but like that's often how it sounds is that great job, but you missed two questions. What happened with those two questions? And then we start doing that to ourselves. Yeah, I did a good job with that talk, but there was one person in the audience who had a mean face. I must not have done as well as I thought I did. Or, I got that promotion, but somebody got it before me. So starting to practice that and with our loved ones can also have an impact on the way that we talk to ourselves. I did a great job on that test, and gosh, I'm frustrated that I missed those two questions. Overall, great job, right? Or, kiddos, amazing work with all of the extracurriculars you're doing this year, and it seems like maybe it's a lot. Do we want to talk about prioritizing something or dropping something? The idea of being proud of ourselves or of other people, it's not contingent on a lack of failures. It's not contingent on perfection, and yet we can frame it as though it is, right? I'm proud of you because you did perfectly. Perfect is impossible. And so if we have that framework, we are always going to walk around feeling less than.
Yeah, just listening to you talk about that, it reminds me of something we've talked about before, and something I try to stress to my kids is to try to enjoy the journey and not just focus on those end results.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes.
well, I think that's probably a good place to wrap up this conversation, but it's always great, especially when we get listener feedback. So listeners out there, as you well know by now, hopefully, when you send us something, Dr. Jen and I will talk about it. So, and if it's meaningful for you, just think about how meaningful it could be for somebody else. So, Dr. Jen, thanks as always, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks so much, Paul.